Is the government hiding aliens? Body language analyst reacts to U.S. Congress UFO UAP hearing. His videos are pretty cool. I like them. The guy's name is the behavioral art, and it's pretty interesting. While we learn about, get XP. Let's see.
Extraterrestrial technology.
Yes. Personally.
Let's see what he said.
Anyone been murdered?
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. Just last week in the US, a House of Representatives subcommittee held a hearing all about UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, which used to be referred to as UFOs, but now they're called UAPs. During this hearing, we heard from 3 key witnesses who have extensive experience working for US government and intelligence. And in this video, we're going to look at...
Okay, I can pause it this way, but I can't pause it the normal way. So I do believe that there's aliens. They have not come to US. They're very far away. That's different galaxy. They're not as intelligent as we want them to be. But yeah. But maybe they are, like, ages ago, and they haven't come back to this place in forever. But yeah, let's continue.
Throughout this hearing, their body language, their facial expressions, their word choice, and try to figure out what's going on here. Is the government hiding?
Is the government hiding?
Or is there a little bit more to this story? Let's dive right in. Now, before we look at some of these clips, I want to reiterate really quickly the challenges of this particular situation. And in this particular case, one of the
Congrats, Ravage.
So a couple of weeks ago, I covered an interview with one of the witnesses, David Grush. And I talked about the challenges, but really quickly, let's go over what they are again. First and foremost, all 3 of these individuals have a lot of experience working for intelligence and within the US military. It's likely that they have some sort of training for resistance to interrogation. They're used to answering questions by staying very calm and not letting their emotions and thoughts leak through body language and facial expressions. The second
that's true. That's true.
Studies have shown that people who are being truthful but fear not being believed often behave the same way deceptive people behave. So anytime I feel like any of these witnesses is trying a little extra hard to convince me
aware that the topic is hard to believe.
I don't know if it's because there's more to this story or because they know.
So it's very hard, basically.
They've been met with a lot of skepticism throughout the years, so they feel the need to elaborate and give more information. Finally, the third challenge is a lot of what we're getting here are prepared statements, questions that they've answered before, they know to answer. They're not really being pressed. They're being asked questions that they're very much
So we don't even need to watch the
end
of the rest of the
by saying that's classified. I can't touch on that, which happens quite a bit throughout this hearing. Now, the one advantage of this particular case,
but although I haven't seen the actual whole
David Grush did a couple of weeks ago, is that all 3 of these gentlemen are under oath in this video. So they took an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And this changes things a little bit.
But people always lie.
Although we can argue that certain things are their interpretation, what they believe, what's been said to them, it's unlikely that they are telling flat out lies, things that they know are not true. Because they're under oath, because all 3 of these gentlemen take their experience in the military very seriously, especially because they're saying certain things that could be verified, and if it's looked into and it turns out they were lying, that's perjury and they're looking at potential jail time. So I'm not alleging that everything they're saying is empirically true, but given the gravity of this hearing and the fact that they're under oath, it's likely that what they're saying is at the very least very much true to them.
Right, now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Lieutenant Ryan
Yeah, that makes
Graves.
sense.
He's the Executive Director of Americans for Safe Aerospace. Lieutenant Graves is also a former U.S. Navy F-18 pilot with his own UAP experience. The next witness, David Grush is a former senior intelligence officer with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and was a senior technical advisor for UAP issues. And finally, retired Navy Commander David Fravor, squadron leader who worked as a naval aviator for 18 years. Mr. Fravor has his own.
I haven't heard any of these people, but
known as the TikTok event. I look forward to hearing from all three of you today.
TikTok event.
Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hands.
Okay, so that's a quick summary from the chairman elaborating on the background of each witness. However, it's going to give me a chance to set up a framework and kind of see where things are starting off. So first and foremost, if we look at the three gentlemen, they're quite in sync. They're doing something we call mirroring, and mirroring is where our posture or our gestures are in sync with someone else. And in this case, if you look at all three of them, they're sitting upright, they've got both their hands in front of them, and there's contact between their hands. In the case of Mr. Graves and Mr. Grush, their fingers are interlocked, and then Mr. Fravor has one hand on top of the other, but besides that, they have very similar posture. Now, this is very likely subconscious. They're not doing this on purpose, but in looking at each other and being aware of each other, they're all kind of sitting in the same way, and this tells me that they are here to present a united front. They're more or less going to be on the same page, and they're more or less on the same side of this story. Now, their posture is synchronized, but let's look at what's out of sync, and that's the space in front of them, the documents that they've brought.
I need to overload.
Let's start with the most minimal and work towards the most elaborate. So if we look at Mr. Fravor, he's the one sitting on our right. He's got his prepared statement in front of him. There are creases in that paper, so it's likely that he had it folded up in a pocket or something like that. And besides that, he's got a bottle of water and a pencil and a notepad that all three of them have the exact same one. So I'm guessing that that pencil, that notepad, and that bottle of water was provided by the venue. Whoever organized the hearing put those there for them if they need it. So it looks like all he brought was his statement, and that checks out. That makes a lot of sense. He's not here to present other people's stories.
Dude, I'm getting 625k XP right now.
He's here to provide eyewitness testimony of what he saw, so all he would need is that statement. Next up is Mr. Graves, who's on our far left, and he has pretty much exactly what Mr. Fravor has, plus he's brought a notebook. And again, this makes perfect sense because he is the executive director of a program where he's heard a lot of testimony from a lot of ex-military, and he probably has some notes in there that he might want to reference. So that's
although I heard that
his notebook, that's
they were allowed to talk.
Mr. Grush, David Grush, who we've already covered a couple of weeks ago, and we're seeing some things here that are very consistent with the analysis that we had of him in that video. So Mr. Grush in front of him has all these documents. You could see under one of the documents appears to be like a folder or a folio where he would have organized those things. And if you look at his paper for his statement, it's not folded. So it was probably in that folder along with all these other things he's brought for evidence or for reference. And it's all laid out in front of him in a very organized fashion. Now, I really quickly want to touch on something that came up quite a few times in my last analysis of David Grush. And it's the fact that it's come up that David Grush has ASD, that he's on the autism spectrum. Now, this is a question I get very often. How do you handle someone who's neurodivergent as a behavioral analyst? And I'm really quickly going to touch on this now, but if you want more details, a couple of weeks ago, I did an analysis of Elon Musk. I'll leave a link in the description where I talked at great length about what we do when we're faced with someone who has ASD or is neurodivergent. And the feedback on that video from people who have ASD or who live with people who have ASD was really, really positive. So I do encourage you to go check that out. However, really quickly, the most important thing to keep in mind is that ASD is not the only condition or disorder that can affect someone's behavior. There are hundreds, ranging from PTSD to social anxiety to BPD and hundreds more. This is why baseline is so important. We are not analyzing people based on this global or cookie cutter way that someone is supposed to behave. Even neurotypical people have enormous differences in baseline, and sometimes conditions aren't even diagnosed or the person isn't even aware of them. So baseline covers all these things. I do want to point out one really interesting moment with Mr. Fravor when the chairman was explaining who Mr. Fravor is, and he said that he has his own UAP experience known as the TikTok event.
Oh yeah, I was asking about that. Yeah.
It's not the TikTok event, it's the Tic Tac event. In fact, later in the hearing, there's another representative who makes a point of saying it's Tic Tac like the candy, because it looked like a little Tic Tac, not TikTok, the app. So when this happened, when the chairman said TikTok, we see a shift in Mr. Fravor's posture.
Mr. Fravor has his own UAP experience, known as the TikTok event. I look forward to hearing from all three of you today.
We see his hands kind of come apart and go into this downwards fingers crossed position, which is a little more self-soothing than the position he was in, which was more like this, one on top of the other. Remember, more surface contact means more self-soothing. So he goes into that position. He also drops his gaze downwards, which is a deviation from baseline for him, because up until that moment, he was sitting, he was looking straight ahead. So in that moment, he looks down, and we see a contained smile on his face. So I think it's more than likely that he heard the chairman use the wrong term, and it's probably a term he's heard misused before, but he wasn't necessarily expecting to hear this mistake from the chairman of this hearing. So we're kind of getting this, oh no. All right, now we're going to dive into their own introductions and testimony.
I was thinking more of it's
as well as the answers that they provide to the questions by Congress, and some really interesting moments that I think is worth a closer look. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical.
His name is the Behavioral Arts.
Regular viewers who want to support the channel, I will leave a link in the
description. Pretty good videos.
I've
seen a couple of them.
The membership program and the perks that you get by
Behavioral Arts.
All right, so each of their introductions is quite long, and I don't want to play the whole thing because there are key moments within each one that I want to focus on. I do encourage you to go to the link in the description and watch the whole hearing and listen to each of their
I'm not watching the whole hearing.
But one by one right now, I want to kind of give you a summary of what they're saying and what stood out to me.
My name is Ryan Fobbs Graves, and I'm a former F-18 pilot with a decade of service in the U.S. Navy. I have experienced advanced UAP firsthand, and I'm here to voice the concerns of more than 30 commercial aircrew and military veterans who have confided their similar encounters with me. In 2014, I was an F-18 Foxtrot pilot in the Navy Fighter Attack Squadron 11, the Red Rippers. After upgrades were made to our jet's radar systems, we began detecting unknown objects operating in our airspace. At first, we assumed they were radar errors, but soon we began to correlate the radar tracks with multiple onboard sensors, including infrared systems, eventually through visual ID. I believe these accounts are only scratching the surface, and more will share their experiences once it is safe to do so. If everyone could see the sensor and video data I witnessed, our national conversation would change. I urge us to put aside stigma and address the security and safety issue this topic represents. If UAP are foreign drones, it is an urgent national security problem. If it is something else, it is an issue for science.
So first off is Mr. Graves,
it's probably a
gives
drone
a testimony about his own experience and the experience of the individuals that he worked with. But ultimately, it seems like his priority is for individuals who witness things to have a safe way to talk about it, to expose it, and for people to look into it. So the first thing I noticed with him is that he's very careful and selective with his language. In fact, as he was talking, I was having a hard time figuring out if he has, with his own two eyes, actually seen a UAP.
Ooh, I have
He's very clever in the way he tells the story.
Triskelion.
He says that he saw something on the radar, but then as he's telling the story, his pronoun shifts from I to we. So now it's, we've seen this, we know that. I gain clarity towards the end when he says, if you had seen the sensor and video data that I've seen. So in that moment, he pretty much confirms that with his own two eyes, he hasn't seen a UAP. He has seen the data, videos and sensor data. I'm not in any way invalidating that. The man has extensive experience. He knows what should show up on a radar or on a sensor. And when he's seeing consistent things that don't make sense, that should absolutely be talked about and investigated. But it's just important to note that any eyewitness testimony of an actual UAP that he's reporting about was said to him by other people. The other thing that caught my interest is right at the end of
he trusts the other guy.
Said, if these UAP are foreign drones, then it poses a security threat. If there's something else, that's a concern for science. So even with all the people he spoke to, you know, he started this organization to encourage people to come forward and share their stories. Even with all that, he doesn't know what these UAPs are. No one's come forward and said, oh, well, this is what they are. No one seems to have that answer. So when we're talking about sightings, we're getting testimony here that is valid. But when we're talking about the government having these and researching them and finding more about them, he doesn't seem to have any information when it comes to that.
My name is David Charles Grush. I was an intelligence officer for 14 years, both in the U.S. Air Force and most recently from 2021 to 2023, at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA. My testimony is based on information I've been given by individuals with a long-standing track record of legitimacy and service to this country. But as I stand here under oath now, I am speaking to the facts as I've been told them. I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, to which I was denied access to those additional read-ons when I requested it.
All right, next up we have David Grush.
Oh, he also didn't see anything.
Once again, a lot of what he's saying is pretty consistent with the News Nation interview that he did to varying degrees.
He also saw like some
data. There was
data
quite a few things that we talked about in that video, but let's look at a few specifics in this introduction that caught my attention. Okay. First of all, I thought it was really hilarious how he said that more recently he was working from 2021 to 2023 at the NGA. And I just think it's really funny because a lot of people out there are saying that he's still working for the government and this is a planned leak that he's doing that has an ulterior motive. And I'm not going to look too much into that statement.
That's why I'm thinking, really well, kind of yes and no, because I've also heard that it's a planned
2023. Hilarious. Once again, please note that he again clarified that his testimony is based on reports that other people have given him. Yep. Another thing that caught my interest was that he says, "As I stand here under oath." And I think that's just him sticking to a script. I think what happened is when he wrote this script, he didn't really give much thought to whether he'd be sitting or standing at a podium to address.
Oh, so he just read it.
He just wrote, "As I stand here." And now he's saying that, but to me it was just weird. I'm like, you're not even standing, you're sitting, as I sit here under oath. So I think that's just him sticking to that script. But anyways, that's not the point. The point is he says, "As I stand here under oath, I am speaking to the facts as I've been told them." And as he says, "I've been told them," he looks up and really makes eye contact with the congressmen and women. And I think it's really important for him to drive that point home because he doesn't want to be accused of perjury. If something that he says ends up being incorrect, in fact, he's making sure that they understand that under oath, he is relaying facts as he's been told. Not saying this is true, just saying that's what I was told. And finally, we have Mr. Fravor, whose entire account is his experience with the famous Tic Tac UAP.
As you know, my name is David Fravor. I'm a retired commander in the United States Navy. In 2004, I was a commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41, the world-famous Black Aces. As we proceeded to the west, the air controller was counting down the range to an object that we were going to, and we were unaware of what we were going to see when we arrived. There, the controller told us that these objects had been observed for over 2 weeks, coming down from over 80,000 feet, rapidly descending to 20,000 feet, hanging out for hours, and then going straight back up. For those who don't realize, above 80,000 feet is space. As we looked around, we saw some whitewater off our right side. It's important to note that the weather on this day was as close to perfect as you could ask for off the coast of San Diego. Clear skies, light winds, calm seas, no whitecaps from waves. So the whitewater stood out in a large blue ocean. All four of us, because we were in F-18Fs, so we had pilots and wisdom in the back seat, looked down saw a white tic-tac object with a longitudinal axis pointing north-south and moving very abruptly over the water like a ping-pong ball. As we pulled nose onto the object, within about a half mile of it, it rapidly accelerated in front of us and disappeared. Our wingmen, roughly 8,000 feet above us, lost contact also. We immediately turned back to see where the whitewater was at, and it was gone also.
Okay, so when it comes to Mr. Fravor, I think he has a very direct, no BS way of telling the story. He gives you the facts. He doesn't seem to have a need to embellish, even with his answers that are coming up.
Oh, don't bring the Ripper to me. Don't bring the Ripper to me.
Behaviorally, there's a couple of interesting things.
Bro, the Ripper is gonna come to me. Oh,
quite a bit while he's telling his story.
Okay, hold on.
He doesn't do it while he's saying the actual testimony of what he saw, but before and after.
I'm alive.
You see quite a bit of face touching, and face touching is something that is associated to stress. The research shows us that when we're stressed or under anxiety,
annoying people bring Ripper demons to me, man.
And often this can cause a tingling sensation and often we see people touch their face to correct
Holy
that.
shit, I almost
In his
died.
case, these face touches are pretty isolated. They are not forming a cluster. Plus, he's reading a prepared statement. Clusters are usually as a response to a question. You want to see how the person's reacting, how they're formulating their answer. He's not formulating anything. This is a prepared statement. So it's interesting to note that there's face touching happening.
Sorry. I literally didn't listen to the.
Throughout his testimony.
Wait. I missed like the last 2 minutes because of that random guy bringing a Ripper Demon to me. So
coming down from over 80,000
just restarting it, okay?
rapidly descending to 20,000 feet, hanging out for hours, and then going straight back up. For those who don't realize, above 80,000 feet is space. As we looked around, we noticed that we saw some whitewater off our right side. It's important to note that the weather on this day was as close to perfect as you could ask for off the coast of San Diego. Clear skies, light winds, calm seas, no whitecaps from waves. So the whitewater stood out in a large blue ocean.
A little scary.
All four of us, because we were in F-18Fs, so we had pilots and Wizzo in the back seat, looked down a small, saw a white tic-tac object with a longitudinal axis pointing north-south and moving very abruptly over the water like a ping-pong ball. As we pulled nose onto the object, within about a half mile of it, it rapidly accelerated in front of us and disappeared. Our wingmen, roughly 8,000 feet above us, lost contact also. We immediately turned back to see where the whitewater was at, and it was gone also.
Okay, so when it comes to Mr. Fravor, I think he has a very direct, no BS way of telling the story. He gives you the facts. He doesn't seem to have a need to embellish, even with his answers that are coming up. He doesn't feel the need to slather it on. Behaviorally, there's a couple of interesting things. For example, he does touch his face quite a bit while he's telling his story. He doesn't do it while he's saying the actual testimony of what he saw, but before and after that story, we do see quite a bit of face touching. And face touching is something that is associated to stress. The research shows us that when we're stressed or under anxiety, the blood flow in our face shifts, and often this can cause a tingling sensation, and often we see people touch their face to correct that. In his case, these face touches are pretty isolated. They are not forming a cluster. Plus, he's reading a
multiple behaviors seen at the same time.
Clusters are usually as a response to a question.
Probability
you want to see how the person's reacting, how they're formulating their answer. He's not formulating anything. This is a prepared statement. So it's interesting to note that there's face touching happening, but it doesn't tell me much at all. We also do see quite a few times throughout his testimony this little smile that he has. It's really apparent when he's talking about the white water going away. And I know that a lot of people are going to instantly jump to the conclusion that it's duping the light. But for me, duping the light is always a very big assumption. So duping the light is a small smirk that we sometimes see on liars. And it has to do with the excitement of getting away with a lie. But because small smiles can happen very often with all kinds of different stuff, jumping to the conclusion of duping the light, I often find is a really big gap to justify. So can it be that? It can. Is it for sure that? I don't think so. However, and this is a big however, footage of the Tic Tac is declassified. It took a while to declassify, but it's out there. So although he's coming out and saying, I saw this thing that I couldn't explain, it's not this massive revelation because that information is out there. So the only person sitting at that table who has actually seen something with their own two eyes is talking about something that is out in the public. So just consider that in your notes. That might be valuable to you and your own assessment, or it might not, but just make note of that.
This is for any one of you. Based off of each of your experiences and observations, do you believe UAPs pose a potential threat to our national security?
Yes, and here's why. The technology that we faced was far superior than anything we had. And you
what's up, KPL?
If you
yes,
had one,
we are still live.
Reverse engineered it, you got it to work. You're talking something that can
real quick.
Go into space, go
we just got 86 necromancy, and we're watching this guy, behavioralist, talking about the UFO. Body analyst reacts to U.S. Congress UFO hearing. How am I 86? I mean, actually, somebody's already gotten 120 apparently, from what I've heard. I don't know if that's true or not. Actually, no, it is true. It is true. I don't have the link anymore, but there is somebody that got 120 already, so that's crazy, you know. But I'm 86, you know. I've this place right here where I'm training is 600K per hour, just AFKing here, so you know, pretty good. I died twice, I think. Did I die twice here? I died once here. Some random guy brought a Ripper Demon into where I was standing, and I died. You know, but we got the Zuck cape back, you know, and yeah. Oh, there it is, Rune Pixels. There it is. Yo, what's up, potatoes? Yeah, it's Dave. Got it. Yeah, yeah. Go to the asylum after you're done there. The asylum? What are you talking about? Asylum, like the Centennial? There, dude. The Senestin Asylum. Every world, I hopped to like 20 worlds. I cannot find a place in the asylum. If you're talking about the savages over there, insane. Glue is level 119. So 3 mil away. Omid level 4. My crew 8, so he went up. They're like neck and neck, basically. Yeah, damn. Well, it's bad at the start, but like when you go higher, like you gotta, like at the start is definitely bad. But when you get up more party, you will definitely do more damage. For sure. You guys believe in UFOs? My crew's taking a nap right now? Okay, okay. You were rank 1.3K? Ooh. What are you now?
Drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants, and leave. And there's nothing we can do about it.
Okay, so quite a few things really quick on this one. First of all, when the question is asked, two of them are ready to answer. Fravor's ready to answer and Graves is ready to answer. They both go to click their button to speak, but then Fravor starts the voice and turns to the other two and says, I can take this one. So David Grush looks at him. We see the thumbs go up like this, almost like with a hand shrug, like saying, I don't have an objection to that. So remember, any form of shrugging, the research shows is
like right now I'm at 620K XP.
I don't have anything to add.
Still in here.
We might see this kind of thing like, please go ahead. But his hands are together, so we see this, yep, go ahead, it's all you. We also notice in that
5 Ironman with 99.
Rush's eyebrows go up, and this not only is part of a shrug, it also indicates social approval. Like when we see someone and we can greet them just with the eyebrows like this, or with the hand in the eyebrows like this, without saying anything. So that could very well be giving him that social approval. And we even see his head going downwards like this, as he has that shrug and saying, yeah, go for it. And often the head down is almost like a bow, almost like I submit, go ahead, no problem. And the moment Fravor answers yes, that there's a threat here, notice what we see instantly in Mr. Grush and Mr. Graves. Mr. Grush immediately smiles. It's a tight-lipped smile, but it's very consistent with that, boom, nailed it. Exactly.
Like, are you talking about the lower levels?
Instantly turns away and looks at the council. Now, we can tell a lot
how much XP
by
is that
where
an hour?
someone's attention is focused. If he
What are you
disagreed
getting
with
anyways?
what Mr. Fravor was saying, we would see him kind of lock his eyes on him, like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? And like, he's curious to know why. The moment Mr. Fravor says yes, Mr. Graves knows that there is a potential threat here, so he instantly just turns away and looks at the audience. Like, you guys need to hear this. So instantly. So we can often tell if someone agrees or disagrees with something by how much attention they're giving it. And we're going to see a lot more of this throughout this hearing.
Did you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured?
Yeah, like it goes up and down.
Conceal these extraterrestrial technology.
Yes. Personally.
Have anyone been murdered that you would that you know of or have heard of? I guess
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
Okay, that was a big moment for me. So in the News Nation interview with Ross Coulthart a couple of weeks ago, he was asked flat out, has anyone been killed to protect this secret? And let's go back and look at his answer.
Have people been killed to protect this secret?
Based on the people I talked to, that was an ongoing concern.
Based on the people I talked to,
Yeah, that's... Oh, yo,
was
and
an
Iron Man,
ongoing
I'm Andy just got a first
Not
necromancer drop.
based on the
Rogue
people that I
top.
talked to, yes. And that's just language. That's just what he's saying. The body language is even adding to the uncertainty of that. In that video, I pointed out the cluster of deception that we saw, and I explained myself entirely as to why. Again, remember, we can never be certain that it's deception, but there was enough going on for me to go, I'm not so sure about this. Now, the part where I got really happy about it is that some of you in the comments indicated that Ross Coulthart, the interviewer, went on to say that when he was discussing with him about this, if anyone got killed, it seemed that David Grush was talking about hearing things through the grapevine, that it was hearsay. He heard someone say that something may have happened. In fact, on his own podcast, Need to Know, he had this to say.
But what he told me was that he has a strong suspicion based
need to go
on
get
interviews that he's
more
done
overload
with
after this.
people whom he says told him they were part of the legacy program. They have strong grounds for suspicion that people have been murdered.
So even to the interviewer who spent a lot of time with him, on camera and off camera, it seems like Mr. Grush said that it's a suspicion, it's a concern, but never confirmed it. Now in this hearing, he's being asked a similar question. Actually, it's the same question, just broken up into two parts. And his answer is really interesting because first he's asked, has anyone been hurt or injured to protect the secret? Not hurt or injured by these technologies while trying to reverse engineer them or work on them, hurt or injured to protect this secret. And his instant answer with no ambiguity, and this is off baseline for him, by the way. Usually it's based on reports of things that I've heard from such and such. It's none of that. It's yes, personally, immediately, no ambiguity. Then he's asked, do you know anyone who's been murdered or killed? So beyond hurt or injured. And now he goes, I have to be careful. So here's what I'm thinking based on these answers. I think that hurt or injured, as far as he's concerned, doesn't necessarily have to be physical. It could be that their career, their reputation was hurt or injured, because he's going to go on to talk about that.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure he knows people who were physically hurt, killed, murdered, beat up in order to buy their silence. Also, here's my question. If you personally know someone who's been injured and hurt to protect this, why didn't that come up in the News Nation interview? When Ross asked him, do you know anyone who's been killed or murdered to protect this secret? Why not say what you said, which is, that's an ongoing concern based on what I've heard. However, I will note that I do know people who were physically hurt to protect this secret. I will also throw this little interesting note, I think, that relates back to what I said earlier about how you have to baseline someone. It's so important regardless of whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical. And it's this. If you ask a neurodivergent person a question and they give you the answer and they don't elaborate, that might be baseline for them because you didn't ask for more details. They're answering the question that they were asked as it was asked. Now, David Grush doesn't really do that. He does often take license to elaborate and go into big, elaborate scientific things that don't exactly relate to the question that was asked. Which is why it's strange to me that when Ross asked him in that interview, has someone been killed to protect the secret, he didn't say, look, there's concern about that, but I do personally know people who were hurt, not killed, hurt.
What about you? What was your experience after you came forward?
Well, it's only been about 2 months or so I guess my experience has been overwhelming support from former colleagues of mine that have privately messaged me, and I do appreciate that. But I do have knowledge of active planned reprisal activity against myself and other colleagues, and it's very, very upsetting to me.
Coming from where?
Death threats or something.
Certain senior leadership at previous agencies I was associated with.
Well, I hope you understand that there would be bipartisan rejection of any attempt to vilify, demonize, or engage in other reprisals against our witnesses and people who are telling the truth from their perspective.
Yeah, there were certain colleagues of mine that were brutally administratively attacked, and it actually makes me very upset as a leader to see that happen to other coworkers and actually superiors of mine over the last 3 years.
How do you account for that response? That seems like a bizarre response.
I call it administrative terrorism. That's their quiver, their tool in the toolbox to silence people, especially. The career government service cares about their career, cares about their clearance, their reputation to climb the ladder. And when you threaten that career path, a lot of people back off.
Mr. Fravor, what about you? What has your experience been since you've come forward with your perspective on this?
Actually, I've been treated very well. And the 6 people that were involved, myself included, all of them have or will be retiring from the military as 05s or 06s. And all my friends that are very senior, 3 and 4 stars, I've talked to them. They believe, they understand there's a problem. But no, I was actually treated really well.
Okay, and there it is.
And
so that pretty much
too.
confirmed what I was thinking up until this moment. So he's being asked what the repercussions were of him coming out, and he talks about coworkers of his who were administratively brutally attacked. And he even says, I call this administrative terrorism. And he talks about how they threaten you to hurt the advancement of your career. It seems like he's not talking about physical repercussions. So earlier when he was asked if he knows anyone who was hurt or injured, I feel like that yes meant more administratively within their careers, their reputations. He also says that this hurts him as a leader. He points to himself, but notice where that hand is. Usually when we point to ourselves, it's more in this area. This is coming up here as he points to himself like this. And this is neck guarding. Usually when we feel vulnerable or we feel defensive, we tend to protect the more vital parts of our body, the neck being one of them.
Dude, I have no more overload.
There's an element of neck guarding to that. I do feel like he's feeling attacked, defensive in this moment. I do think that this investigation on him is hurtful to him because he thinks he's doing the right thing. But I think his main concern, and we talked a lot about his need for belonging, his need for being part of something, and I think that's coming out here. His main concern is his other coworkers, other colleagues who are suffering because of this coming out and talking about it. The other interesting thing of note is that the one person on this panel who actually did see something and is out there talking about how he saw something that can't possibly be human technology seems to have had absolutely no repercussions. So that's also interesting to me because Grush is saying that, there is a silencing campaign. And then we have this guy who's been walking around telling people, no, there's vessels out there I've seen with my own eyes that cannot be human. And no one seems to be wanting to silence him. Bit of an inconsistency there. Not sure what's going on. Finally, I want to address something that the congressman said. He said, I hope you realize that there would be bipartisan rejection if anyone tried to penalize you for this. And I have to say, this is one of the most harmonious, cooperative hearings I've ever seen, ever. I've analyzed a lot of events like this, and you can often sense tension or disagreement, and sometimes they're kind of throwing little, jabs at each other. This was insane. Like he used the word bipartisan, and there was such cooperation from both sides, such acceptance, and it was kind of crazy to me because in the other interview, the News Nation one, we talked about how at the end there seems to be this element of bringing people together because when there's a higher threat, people come together. And it's almost like we're seeing that happen because there's a bigger threat at hand. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. We're all humans and we're coming together as Americans to figure this out.
Can you please explain to me in detail the event that occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base?
We're here.
Certainly. In the 2003 timeframe, a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard sided red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains. There was a similar event within 24 hours later in the evening. This was a morning event, and this is information that was received through one of the witnesses that have approached me at Americans for Safe Aerospace.
Was this documented in any official form, whether it was a police blotter?
Yes, they had official documentation and records from the event that the witness held over the years.
And have you seen that before on any other equipment and/or during your flight time?
I have not seen what they've described. This object was estimated to be almost the size of a football field, and I have not seen anything personally that large.
So my one question when it comes to Mr. Graves is, where are those people? He's often talking about people who saw this and people who saw that and people who have come and told him that they saw all these different things. And Mr. Grush has said on numerous occasions that, I can't give you those names, it's classified, but in a closed SCIF, I can divulge that information. But when it comes to
compartmented
Mr. Graves,
information facility,
why don't we have one witness there with him who has actually seen something? Now he might bring a few forward. I would love to see that. But in this case, he's here, again, giving hearsay information. Why not have one at this hearing? Maybe I'm just being impatient. Maybe I just have to wait and see who he brings forward. That's fine. The other question I would have for Mr. Graves, if I was interviewing him, is, are there any witnesses who have come forward that you didn't believe? And is there a protocol in place for you to assess credibility? Because it kind of seems, and I could be very wrong about this, but it kind of seems that because he has this organization where he wants to make sure that people are heard and that he himself believes something is out there, he might be overcorrecting the flaw he sees in the government to where no one's talking about this. And in that overcorrection, he might be accepting almost any story as evidence. Because I don't know what the standard is. So I would love to get, I'm not saying he is, I'm not saying he isn't. I would just have to ask him a few more questions about, is there some sort of process you go through to assess credibility, or is anyone coming to your organization believe that what they saw is legit?
So who gets to decide this, in your opinion, in the past?
It's a group of career senior executive officials.
Okay, are they government officials?
Both in and out.
Do what?
Both in and out of government, and that's about as far as I can go there. Yeah.
All right, well, that leads to my next question. Which private corporations are directly involved in this program? How much taxpayer money has been invested in these programs, to your knowledge? I mean, we know we audit the Pentagon every year, and I've been here 5 years, and they failed the dadgum thing every year. They lose over $1 billion a year, we think, and I've told the Department of Defense maybe 60% of their assets are unaccounted for, whatever the heck that means. In the public sector, you go to jail for that kind of crap. So tell me.
So there's no denying, even for the skeptics, that even if we don't acknowledge that there's definitely evidence here of, non-human life, there's no denying that something weird is going on in terms of the communication between Congress and the Pentagon. It's kind of crazy that the Pentagon can hide that much from their auditors,
that much money,
whereas a civilian can't even come anywhere near that kind of activity. And also, I do want to bring this up. They referenced numerous times throughout this hearing that they were denied a SCIF. They were denied to sit in a room with David Grush and ask him confidential questions. They're obviously going to continue to work on that, but so far they were denied the right to do that. My question is, isn't that an admission of guilt to a certain extent? Isn't that an admission of something? Because here's the thing. If someone came out with an accusation against me and you asked me if I'm okay with you talking to them, I'd be like, yeah, go ahead. I didn't do it. They can tell you whatever they want. But for me to say, no, I'm not okay with you guys talking,
it's weird.
It's gotta be. It's gotta be that there's something I don't want coming out. Now, I don't know what that is. I don't know if, maybe they think that Grush doesn't have the facts, but some of what he thinks he knows could be damaging. I don't know what that is. But I'm left wondering, why can't Congress override some of this stuff?
Definitely a little
weird.
weird.
Should really look into, okay, who's denying us access to this? On whose authority are we not allowed to talk about this or investigate this? It just seems weird to me that there's this lack of communication to where Grush is more informed as to who's making these decisions than Congress themselves. It's very strange. So yeah, a SCIF should happen. More conversations should happen. Even if they lead to nothing, there needs to be more questions asked.
Appreciate you guys coming out today, testifying. Look, I've been here for 6 months, and I'm pretty skeptical. I don't trust anything in this town. And
anything in this town.
And so, I think that's because I'm from Missouri. You've got to show me, right? With that being said, there's been a lot of things that have been said in the public, Mr. Grush, And so I want to get down to, if we can, some specifics, right? Has any of the activity been aggressive, been hostile in your reports?
I know of multiple colleagues of mine that got physically injured. And the activity, and I got
by UAPs or by people within the federal government?
Both.
Okay, so there has been activity by alien or non-human technology and or beings that has caused harm to humans.
I can't get into the specifics in an open environment, but at least the activity that I personally witnessed, and I have to be very careful here because they tell you
I
never.
thought the other guy personally witnessed and these
what
two
I personally
didn't.
witnessed myself and my wife was very disturbing. Okay, I think you all know where I'm going with this. Before we look at the question and the answer rather, so if I had to pinpoint in this entire hearing which congressperson is the most skeptical of UAPs and which one believes the most, they're sitting next to each other. It's Burleson, the one who's talking right now, and who is the most skeptical, and Gates, sitting right next to him, to his right, our left, is the one who I would say believes the most, because he goes into great length about his experience and his challenges, and you could just tell in his language that he's very much on the same side as the witnesses. So while Burleson is expressing his skepticism, we see Gates and he's kind of just staring at Burleson like this, giving him a pretty cold stare. I think there's a part of him going like, oh no, this is not what we were going for here. Like, I just feel like he feels Burleson is kind of going against this open, accepting discussion that seems to be taking place. What's hilarious is that later on when Mr. Gates is talking about his own experience trying to investigate this, and he's making some pretty sensational claims, Burleson is staring him down. It's so funny to see, like, he is staring at him the entire time he's talking and barely moving. And we even see occasionally his eyebrows kind of flash down in curiosity. But remember what I said earlier, when Graves agreed with Fravor, he didn't need to stay fixated on him. He turned away and looked at the hearing to say, like, guys, listen to this. But in this case, Burleson is staring down Gates because of that disagreement. He can't take his eyes off him. Like, what are you talking about? Like, he's curious about this. So that contrast is really interesting. Anyways, they both have their place in this hearing, and they're both very much needed. You need someone who's on the side of the witnesses to open them up and make them feel like they're being heard. And you need the skeptic to ask the tough questions. So, and by the way, Mr. Burleson did it very respectfully. He thanked them for being here. He was never disrespectful. He just said, I tend to be a little more skeptical. And then he leaned on this, who's been hurt question. And again, we have an inconsistency because he was asked if anybody was hurt, whether by aliens or by government. And he said, yes, he knows personally people who were physically hurt. He now uses the word physically. And then he confirms that this is both by non-humans and by government. But again, if we go back to that interview with Ross Coulthart, he said this.
Have human beings been hurt or killed by a non-human intelligence?
While I can't get into the specifics because that would reveal certain U.S. classified operations, I was briefed by a few individuals on the program that there were malevolent events like that.
I was briefed by certain individuals that there were malevolent events like that. So in that answer, it certainly doesn't seem like he personally knows someone who was physically hurt by non-humans, but here he's saying that he does. And not only that, he's saying that he knows people who were physically hurt by government, whereas earlier it really seemed like that administrative terrorism thing he talked about was more about hurting people's careers and reputations, not so much the physical. Remember, he got pretty ambiguous about that. So yeah, there seems to be this fluctuation in his answers as to who was hurt. Was it physical? Was it by government? Was it by non-humans? It's fluctuating within the same hearing, within the hearing and the interview. So I don't know. I don't, again, he's under oath. So it's not like he's just making things up, but we're seeing that there are inconsistent answers, that his confidence in what he knows seems to be fluctuating.
Have you seen the spacecraft?
I have to be careful to describe what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors. Yeah.
And have you seen any of the bodies?
That's something I've not witnessed myself.
He said no.
Speaking of inconsistencies, here we are again. So he's being asked if he's seen the spacecraft. He says elsewhere in this hearing, more than once, that he's only seen documents and photographs. In fact, there's a point in this hearing where he flat out confirms that he hasn't seen anything with his own eyes.
I've actually never seen anything personally, believe it or not. So.
All right.
So what is this? Why is he saying, like, you know, have to be careful and we have to talk about this in private, which is something he is saying quite often throughout this hearing. But there are certain things where I want to go, why? Why is that confidential?
Oh,
For
dude,
example,
I didn't have my death
whether
card
you've
on
seen
for some
something
reason.
with your own eyes or not, why is that confidential? Especially when you're
That's
saying
why
times
my
that you
XP
have
dropped
it.
so hard.
Also, if someone is being harmed by
I see.
government
I accidentally
to
put
stay
on my,
quiet, why is that confidential?
Excalibur.
That sounds pretty illegal to me.
Okay. You've stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
So that's confusing. First of all, he says he can't say if there's been contact with the non-humans, but then he says that they have recovered non-humans.
I didn't know that.
Or non-human biologics. Isn't that more or less the same thing? Like if you recovered one, and again in News Nation he said sometimes, you know, they're alive and sometimes they're not.
Sometimes
Wouldn't
they're
it be
alive.
fair to assume that there has been contact? But more importantly, why is one confidential and not the other? Like, why can't he say in public that, yeah, they have retrieved biologics, but he can't say whether there's been contact with them? Wouldn't that be more or less the same amount of confidentiality? It kind of seems like now that he's under oath, there are certain things where he's just saying, I can't talk about that.
Is there any indication that these UAPs could be essentially collecting reconnaissance information? Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Grush?
Fair assessment, yeah.
Mr. Fravor?
Very possible.
Again, in the national security vein, is it possible that these UAPs would be probing our capabilities? Yes or no, Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Grush?
Yes.
Fravor?
Definitely.
Okay, so I'm going to rapid fire this really quick. The first question was, is it possible that these non-humans are collecting reconnaissance information? Now, if you look at Grush and Fravor, they say it's very possible, fair assessment. So, possible, fair assessment. But Graves says yes. How can he possibly know that? He has testimony of sightings. He has said that he doesn't know what they are.
My friend did say that he doesn't trust Graves.
Testimony that he doesn't know the nature of these UAPs. So how can he possibly know what they're doing? That was confusing for me.
Is based off of the information that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs are interested in our nuclear technology and capabilities?
Yes.
By external observation, sure, that could be a fair assessment, yeah.
Yes.
And once again, here, I don't know how they
guy
can
and he's
possibly
like, "Oh,
know
shit."
what the UAPs are interested in. Again, maybe Mr. Grush, who's giving the most kind of ambiguous answer, maybe he's talked to some people who have reason to believe that due to communication or some stuff that they saw, that the UAPs are collecting data. But again, Graves has only talked to people who have sightings. No research, doesn't know the nature of these things. So I don't know how he can know that. And again, Fravor, who preaches sticking to the facts, based on just seeing one thing fly really fast, he knows, because he says yes, no ambiguity. He knows that that thing is interested in their nuclear technologies. I don't know. Maybe he's basing that on other conversations he's had, but I feel like he would have to do what Mr. Grush did and say, based on conversations I've had, yes. Okay, so there it was. Overall, I think a great first step. I think it's great to see that Congress is taking this seriously and is seriously saying we need to have these conversations. We need to dig into this. We need to figure out what's going on. So that's great. But in terms of concrete evidence, I'm still left wanting more. And that's not saying it doesn't exist. It's just saying that in terms of the conversation we had, we're getting a lot of this is classified, that's classified. We're getting some inconsistent answers in terms of repercussions and other answers that were provided that were different in the interview on News Nation and on
that's true.
this hearing.
That's
we
weird.
have an eyewitness who's talking about something he saw. I think there's value there. However, once again, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And in this hearing, we haven't seen extraordinary evidence. There's promise of extraordinary evidence. I would love for Mr. Graves to bring some of those witnesses in to try to get their testimony validated. For Mr. Grush to get that skiff and start giving actual things that he said, I can't, that's classified.
But non-human biology could be just be
in a closed environment.
An animal,
the one
right?
advantage we have here over the News Nation coverage is that he is under oath here. And maybe that's why we're getting a lot more of that's classified, that's classified, that's classified, because on News Nation, he took a little bit of license to maybe embellish here and there, but here he can't do that because he's under oath. So we were hitting a lot of roadblocks. I'm still of the opinion that Mr. Grush is conveying secondhand information, hasn't seen anything, and is still operating under the confines of his superiors. So the same people that he's trying to expose have put rules in place, and he's playing within those guidelines. He's very much respecting those rules. So yeah, technically he's a whistleblower in that he filled out a whistleblower complaint, but he's not a whistleblower in the sense that he's divulging this information that's classified, that he's coming out and saying, hey, this is what's going on. He's willing to go there, but he's still following rules that somebody else placed. So yeah, there it is. A lot to think about here.
All right, well, that, I feel like I didn't get anything out of that video. But I guess I didn't hear their testimony or anything about it. Only like kind of snippets. So a little bit more information, I guess. Cool. Bunch of hearsay, basically all the same, yeah.